Okay, picking up where we left off. This is going to be part 4. So this is for the end of her talk about solutions now about to the math trauma. These are some traumatizing traditions she said we should end. She says we should always have retakes or corrections on tests. That we should not group by we should not be tracking and having like a advanced class and a remedial class. We should have we should not use speed to measure understanding. Whoever finishes fastest is not the one who understands it the best necessarily. We should actually prioritize collaboration over individual work, not individual work over collaboration. We should not tell students it's okay not to be good at math, because math is part of all of us, and so none of us should ignore that part. It's part of the world. We shouldn't teach tricks when there's when problems can actually be solved through thinking. Better to actually think it through than to use a trick. We should focus on sound reasoning rather than on just getting the answer. And we should always acknowledge there's more than one right way to get an answer. All right, and with that, back to Casey Allen.
So big picture implications, and then we'll take any other questions. If we look at that orange quote right there, is again from the American Psychological Association, that under any circumstances, healing trauma requires people to have positive and successful experiences that prepare them to handle new situations that might trigger the trauma. It's the only way that they get better. And so this is really our challenge, and I would say our opportunity in math. For those of us who have been doing this work a long time, I can't believe I've been working in math education now for 30 years. We've talked a lot about what to do for our students and the directions that we wanted the field to go. I think it's time for us to be brave about the things that we should not do, things that kids should not experience anymore in school in the name of mathematics. And I'm convinced that we're positioned right now because of the neuroscience data, the neuroimaging. I think we have a chance to do what we've known we needed to do in math for a long time. And if we embrace this challenge of math trauma, that we can disrupt the cycle that we have seen in our midst for so long. And in doing so, we can really not only change kids' lives, but I think we have the chance to change our discipline as well. And who knows, maybe even this crazy country of ours as well. So thank you all. Let's get to some more questions.
Okay, so now she's going to take some questions, and this last screen talked about implications for educators. That means for teachers. So how do we teach math differently? You guys are students, so you're like, well, let me know. It seems maybe not as important to you because you're not math teachers, but you can definitely give feedback as to what kind of teaching works. So I'm going to skip to one of her first answers that they had asked about how, if you're a math teacher and you're stuck at a school where math is taught a certain way, how do you bring some new pieces into it, even if the school doesn't approve of what you're doing?
I do think that if we are monitoring the negativity, that's really the most important thing. I think the place to start, and that's why I use that first, is that we just need to know and accept physiologically what's happening in kids' brains when this negative emotion gets triggered. And I think that's just a fact. And so if we can then talk with our colleagues about, well, so what do we do about that, right? What do we do about the fact that if kids come in and put their heads down on the very first day in your algebra class, and you haven't even gotten started yet, if we can't create a culture and work with them to help them understand that, like, we got to get over whatever happened in your past life that's making you put your head on the desk right now. We got to work through that, because I want you to be successful. We're all going to be successful in this class. And the first step is in you feeling okay about math. So let's start talking about how that could happen.
Awesome. Okay, so there are a lot of questions that I'm going back through. One that Julie asked was, in other countries, and she said she's thinking specifically of China, are teachers specializing in math for younger ages and therefore less likely to be math anxious themselves as teachers?
Okay, that doesn't sound relevant to what we're doing. Let's see if we can skip ahead. Because they're asking about, really, should you have had a special math teacher when you were in elementary school? In other words, is part of the problem that you had elementary school teachers who were not that into math? Because if you could imagine how that would be a problem, and it would be, so she's saying maybe we need more like math specialists for second grade, third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade when you learned about fractions and stuff. But let's move on.
How can we help each other? How can middle school and high school colleagues collaborate with their elementary colleagues in order to create more safety? We all, as teachers, we all have mathematics identities too. So how can we invest in each other's mathematics identities? How can we learn from each other? I think elementary teachers are much braver in some of their pedagogical practices around math than some of their colleagues who teach the upper grades. But they're less confident sometimes in their mathematical content knowledge than the folks teaching the upper grades. So how can we learn and become better by working together? I always say math is better together. I think math teaching is better together too.
Okay. How do you change a department that believes in one-shot assessments?
Yeah.
Just to translate that question, how do you, you guys are used to one-shot assessments. What your score on the test is your score on the test. But this here it says, well, there's other ways of demonstrating learning besides doing well on one test. There ought to be a retakes. There ought to be corrections. How do you make that case? How do you argue for that? In other words, because we don't want to change our ways of giving just one test if it's just a way for you to get free points and for you to get a higher grade than maybe of course you could get an A if we let you copy all the answers. In other words, like if corrections means you just get to you get your test back, you copy your friend's correct answers, you turn it in, and then you get the same 100% that she got. Well, that doesn't seem right, So how do you argue for corrections in a way that makes that really still measures math ability fairly?
So I'm thinking a department that believes in one-shot assessments is probably still using points and percentages grading. Mm-hmm. There's a great book called Grading Smarter, Not Harder. It's by a guy named Myron Dweck. I think that could be a really interesting department read. There is a huge movement in the United States right now towards proficiency grading. Kids being graded on what they know and can do as opposed to the points that they've earned. And it's actually pretty well documented that grading grounded in points and percentages doesn't end up reflecting what kids know. And we can, either a lot of parallels we can draw to medicine or the person who fixes your car or whatever, but there's a lot of, usually this is grounded in grading, and which is a much bigger conversation, and the landscape of grading in the United States right now is pretty complicated. But I do think that is beginning to have conversations about what are those grades representing. There's also an ed leadership edition from a couple of years ago that was all focused on grading that could be an interesting read with a department. At a minimum, kids need to be able to revise, to do some sort of test corrections or something to demonstrate a second take at whatever they did with a test. That's often a first step. Otherwise, it's the grade and they crumple it up and throw it in the waste can, and that's not even feedback. That doesn't. There's no. Really, we want to be feeding the learning forward with our feedback. So I do think that the first step in that process is to really having a conversation about grading.
Okay, so I'm going to cut off the questions part, and to fill out the rest of this 15-minute video, I'm going to go back to the beginning. I think you missed the introduction in the beginning one, so might as well just give you a sense of what this thing was that you walked into. So here we go.
Welcome, everybody, to the Global Math Department. My name is Jessica Bogey, and I'm your host this evening. Tonight we are going to hear from Casey all about math trauma, and it's going to be an awesome presentation. She's actually presenting it next week at NCTM as well, so you guys get the first look here. While we're waiting for a few stragglers to make their way in, can you please take some time to introduce yourselves in the chat window? Tell us what you teach, where you teach it, and make sure you also include your Twitter handle so we can follow some new people tonight, make some new mathy friends, and continue the conversations on Twitter when we are done. So take some time to introduce yourself.
So if you wanted to meet Casey Allen on Twitter, the lady who runs this, her Twitter handle is Math for Justice. So yeah, at this point, I think you guys got the idea. I think we're about done here. Let's call this the end of part 4 and the end of our series of lectures on math trauma. Thanks for watching.